Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and we're finally going over the legendary, the epic, the nearly always applicable dunning-kruger effect. I have referenced this countless times, almost every episode actually, because it applies so often in analyzing people's psychology, particularly goofs. And we all know that there are no shortage of goofs out there. In fact, one could argue that there are more goofs than ever before.
You think everybody has a dunning-kruger goof?
Well, ain't they?
You think everybody has a dunning-kruger goof?
Well, ain't they?
Who can argue with Mick here? Who can argue with Mick? Welcome, Dragon Tracer Ovik. Everybody else here. This will be a technical analysis as well as adding my own thoughts and examinations in countless subjects. I mean, there's over 1,000 people on my Dunning-Kruger goof list on Twitter. And obviously they're too dumb to realize, but they are my subjects for my book. I've been working on a Dunning-Kruger book for a while, The Dunning-Kruger Effect and the Collapse of Western Civilization. Welcome, Aaron and Sarah. So all of these individuals, and that's also why I usually don't ban or delete comments or don't do anything like that on this channel, because they provide so much educational value in analyzing psychology, and the root of it all is the Dunning-Kruger effect, but there's also other factors that I haven't heard other people talk about, which I will of course be going into in typical MINDSHOCK fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront, as it is going extinct pretty much everywhere else, definitely in the mainstream, and pretty much everywhere else. So if you want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason return to a world where it is going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you're subscribed, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast, or requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section, or if you were with us here live, drop them in the live chat. Yeah, this is, I mean, I have a few books that I've been working on for a while, and obviously, comprehensive and exhaustive is the name of the game here on MINDSHOCK. So, yeah, they're all quite long, but I want them to be definitive editions on the subject. So yeah, I've been kind of close to done with the book for over a year now, but there's just a couple more points I really want to expand upon. Sarah asks, do you have a Goodreads account? I do not. Quite an extensive physical library, though. Okay. So, first we will go over the basics for those that are not aware of what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, and then we'll go over how I utilize it for psychoanalysis. This entire channel was actually born out of a dearth of logic and reason in the mainstream and everywhere. And I noticed a couple of very glaring psychological issues with the average coincidence theorist, with the average goof out there, with the average person discussing true crime, the paranormal, anything, conspiracies. There are a few key patterns in their psychological makeup and how they approach information. If you haven't checked out my metacognition episode, that's one of the best and most important ones I have ever done. So, metacognition is simply thinking about thinking. So trying to understand why you think the way you think, how you think, what you think. And most people don't do that. Now, in a world of meta, when like everything is meta, the only thing people aren't looking at is the meta of their own thinking, which would be quite important if you're concerned about truth or trying to become more logical or smarter in any way, instead of just some indoctrinated goof regurgitating whatever you heard at the indoctrination facility you call school. Yeah, it's not going to be a short book. It's a pretty long book because there's a lot to go over. But I do believe I make it in general. I don't really make any claims here regarding things being true or untrue. Obviously, I can guess. I can have an opinion. I can surmise certain things. I can ponder, and I do ponder without claiming absolute truth. That if people did understand the Dunning-Kruger effect, metacognition, and a few other psychological concepts, the West would not have begun collapsing in the 90s, regardless of the amount of propaganda on the idiot box. Welcome, Read Deeply, Christopher Allen. So this one's been in the making for a long time. I was probably supposed to do this episode years ago now. But we're finally getting to it. We're finally getting to it. And I'll also kind of go over the limitations of it. Because a lot of people, when you invoke this, they're just very dogmatic and religious about its application. Instead of addressing or comprehending why the Dunning-Kruger effect exists in the first place. And so one of the best graphs on this is this one. I'll put it on the screen right now. Obviously, YouTube's super laggy, as always, on the channels that are heavily shadow banned, because apparently the masses should not be doing their own thinking. So, yeah, let me get this on the screen here. And if anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to bring them up. So, I actually went over this super briefly in the new logical analysis system that I used on... Was that Matt Walsh's defense of the moon landing. But the Dunning-Kruger effect, people that are new to something, the confidence spike initially. Then, the more they look into it, they realize they don't actually know anything. And then they start to realize, okay, maybe I do know something, but then wait a second, it's actually still very complicated, because the answer to any question is usually it depends, and otherwise you'd be spamming false dichotomy or black and white logical fallacies, because there's always a lot of variables. Reductive logical fallacies is when you pretend there are not. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals how individuals with limited experience tend to overestimate their skills and knowledge due to the unawareness of what they don't know. And so here's what's interesting. I think actually Dunning and Kruger were actually quite limited in their study. Welcome, Saber Crosby. I think they were quite limited, but that doesn't mean they weren't onto something. That doesn't mean they're not generally correct. But I'll explain why I think they were incomplete in their full analysis. Because they were mostly looking at data. They're not necessarily looking at the reasons behind it incredibly deeply and why some people don't suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect at all. And so that's what I go over in my book a lot as well. So I'll just go over the cognitive bias as Wikipedia defines it, and then I'll get a little deeper. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias that describes the systemic tendency of people with low ability in a specific area to give overly positive assessments of this ability. The term may also describe the tendency of high performers to underestimate their skills. A lot of people don't really focus on that part of it. But I'll explain the limitations after I go over all of this. The term may also describe the tendency of high performers to underestimate their skills. It was first described by the psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, which is actually fairly modern for the fields of psychology and philosophy. In popular culture, Dunning-Kruger effect is sometimes misunderstood as claiming people with low intelligence are generally overconfident, instead of describing the specific overconfidence of people unskilled at particular areas. And that's true, and that's why this chart here is somewhat of an oversimplification. The Dunning-Kruger effect has been demonstrated across multiple studies in a wide range of tasks from fields such as business, politics, medicine, driving, aviation, spatial memory examinations in school, and literacy. I mean, it's actually everything. And that's what's so fascinating on how it applies to everything. The original study by Dunning and Kruger focused on logical reasoning, grammar, and social skills. The effect is usually measured by comparing self-assessment with objective performance. For example, participants may take a quiz and estimate their performance afterward, and their estimates are then compared to their actual results. And this has gotten worse and worse for a few different reasons. I'm going to spoil it here just so everybody can follow along here. The two factors they did not specifically go into deeply is narcissism and mental weakness, which both of those all go together as well. And this is something, and again, I did a dedicated podcast on this as well. Are you mentally weak? Between that one and the metacognition one. So most people are very mentally weak, and we're not talking about clinical narcissism here. We're talking about narcissistic tendencies, may or may not be a clinical narcissist, but their ego basically has them on really short strings, and that's connected to mental weakness, because you do have to be mentally strong to be able to take criticisms, because most supposedly functional adults walking around these days, I mean, what is their true mental strength level? I mean, most of them are like 4-year-olds. They can't handle any kind of they can't handle being wrong. I mean, just look, even in the post-Epstein era with conspiracies, like, there's still a lot of coincidence theorist bootlickers, these authority-worshipping cultists. They're still pretending most conspiracies are fake. So, Dragon Tracer says, in controversial topics, most people don't get past the know-it-all stage. Yeah, well, in many topics. Sarah Catherine says, I'm learning about this in my psychology class, too. Yeah, I think, so, I don't know what school, I don't know what grade you're in, or if this is college or high school, but even college level, they really don't go that deep in the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that's why, even when I started this entire podcast, when I started MINDSHOCK, logic and reason are not independent of psychology. So everything, in my opinion, goes back to, in some way or another, and yes, this is a positive claim, one of the very few I have made, is, I shouldn't say absolutely everybody, most people, this is going to be going back to mental weakness. Because the difference between somebody who can understand that governments do bad things and conspire, that evil people don't always act alone, especially not politicians or the cops, they don't always act alone. So this lack of understanding, it's mental weakness. You don't need a crazy high IQ. There's people with relatively high IQs that are so mentally weak, they can't grasp conspiratorial concepts because they need their blankie. They need their cult of authority worship. because they're too mentally weak to live in a world where so-called political leaders, authorities would be involved in these things, satanic ritual abuse, etc. So the mental weakness is far greater of a factor than IQ. Far greater. I mean, there's middle school dropouts who understand that there's people in positions of authority that do bad things and they don't always do them alone. So this mental strength aspect is critical. And then you have ego and narcissism, because especially the past 30, 40 years or so, all of society, I mean, especially post-Instagram release, but all of society is basically designed to appeal to the ego now. And with that, you have far more narcissistic people who are too mentally weak to even consider the possibility that they're not only wrong, that they're wrong about everything. Think about the amount of mental strength required. Now, another factor that people don't really... I mean, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and this is connected here too. Upton Sinclair: "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding." So this is, again, connected to the ego. Because, for example, let's say certain medical treatments actually don't work as advertised and perhaps might do way more harm than good, if any good at all. We don't need to really specify which those are. But if you're in a profession that is making money off of those things, are you even going to try to summon the mental strength required? Like, you wouldn't even try, because your paycheck is dependent on you not doing that. And most people, again, you have to be mentally strong to care about the truth more than your paycheck. And there are examples of this. I mean, you know, the whistleblowers. The whistleblowers and a lot of these things that come forward, they're literally putting their lives on the line. That's mental strength. Yeah, there's an old saying, you know, don't believe everything you hear. There's a better one. Don't believe everything you think. When I first heard that one, that's a good one. That's a good one. And again, that goes to mental strength and ego, because think about it. Like, most people are so narcissistic that they connected their identity to their thoughts and beliefs about reality, their political identities, whatever. So they connected their identity to it because they're that insecure and mentally weak. So this is, of course, all connected to the dunning-kruger effect. So it's not just about competence, even though that's all a factor as well. So, continuing on here, a number of explanations for and criticism of the Dunning-Kruger effect have been proposed. The metacognitive explanation holds that poor performers misjudge their abilities because they lack the ability to recognize the qualitative differences between their performance and the performance of others. And here's another good point. It's not just about believing. Now, this is the crux of my book, actually. It's not just about what do you believe is true or false. I mean, that's actually the least relevant out of all of this. It's how people react when they're, and this is what I do all over Reddit and Twitter and in the chat here sometimes. It's how people react when I point out. So they're waddling and quacking, i.e. demonstrating that they don't understand basic logic. So we're not even talking about a specific topic here. The topic's irrelevant. XYZ topic, it's irrelevant. The basis of which they formed their belief or opinion, regardless of whether it's true or not, is illogical because they cannot think critically or apply logic. So when I point that out, immediately their subconscious recognizes that what I said was true, that's why people get triggered. And the next critical point that is all connected here, and again, I go over all of it in my book, and this is Dunning-Kruger is kind of lacking in this area, is psychological projection. How does the subconscious, because the subconscious is connected to the truth of reality. Call it cosmic consciousness, call it what you will. So here is, we're going deep here, but all of these things are interconnected, and anybody that has seen my exchanges on social media, you may have just thought I was just laughing at clueless people. But the reason I call them a Dunning-Kruger goof is to see, and over the years, it's always the same predictable response. Because the subconscious will respond in the same way when the truth is exposed in individuals who are too mentally weak to confront their own deficiency. So there's two things at play at the same time. They're too incompetent to realize their incompetency, their main conscious mind, but their subconscious isn't. Their subconscious can recognize, and then that's where you get their psychological projection, cope spiraling, and triggering that occurs in these situations. Again, if anybody wants to see this in action, just check out my exchanges on Reddit or Twitter, and you'll see the same cope spirals going on once the subconscious mind has recognized the truth of their deficiency being exposed. HelpfulProfessor.com has some basic definitions here. Psychological projection is a defense mechanism where individuals attribute their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or motives to another person. In doing so, they defend themselves against their own unconscious impulses or qualities by denying their existence in themselves and attributing them to others. Examples: blaming others for one's own mistake. A student who didn't study for an exam might claim the teacher failed to teach the material properly. And let's not fall for false dichotomy logical fallacies. More than one thing can be true at the same time, right? So that could also be true. The office gossip: an employee who frequently talks about others might accuse colleagues of spreading rumors about themselves, which again, that might also be true. But anyway, the point here is you cannot fool the subconscious mind. Now, someone who's secure within themselves and who's not ego-dominated and who's not a narcissist, their reaction is completely different. Even if they think you're wrong in pointing something out, they don't projection cope spiral. They don't start spamming fallacies. Their reaction is calm and collected, and if they are mentally strong, they can consider that they're wrong, even while remaining to think that they're correct. So, and you can, again, see all of this in action anytime you see any people getting triggered. This is what's going on, and it's all connected. So when the Dunning-Kruger is called out, when a person's incompetency is called out, if they start getting triggered and projection cope spiraling, their subconscious mind has accepted that this is indeed their own deficiency. And then they'll start blaming the other party by saying they're stupid or incompetent or don't understand things because their subconscious has recognized that that's actually them. And some of these people, one of the most famous, there's Alex Boge on Twitter. There's a couple, I forgot a lot of their names, but I don't even know who has the record. There's a couple of these goofs. They actually cope spiraled for a week straight. And I just kept egging them on and laughing at them because I wanted to see how triggered and insecure they are. So the more insecure they are about themselves, the more ego-dominated, they might cope spiral for a whole week. I think a week is the record, maybe even 10 days. There's some anti-flat earth grifters are particularly insecure about those positions because it's a very triggering topic. Welcome, Austin MP. Angle of Elevation says, Dunning-Kruger is saying the 2017 Pizzagate was a conspiracy from nutters and then reading the Epstein files in 2026. Well, I actually haven't really seen the cope yet. It's mostly just flat-out denial, but I don't know. I didn't actually see people saying, wait a second, this is all coincidental and it's not related or something of that nature. Just the vindication of Alex Jones at every turn has just been, it's been so wild. Absolutely wild. But yes, all of these topics are connected, and that's why I find coincidence theorist psychology so fascinating. There's also Stockholm syndrome is involved as well. When really mentally weak people, they don't want to do, I don't know about say can't, they don't want to do, they're too mentally weak to do their own thinking. It's easier to believe what's on the idiot box. It's easier to just take on blind faith the words of the corrupt so-called perceived authorities that are always wrong about everything. It's easier to just pretend that they know what they're doing, that authorities know what they're doing. So the Dunning-Kruger effect, a little bit more based in competency, but what I mostly investigate is the competency of being able to think critically, to be able to utilize deductive reasoning and comparing and contrasting things, understanding the scientific method. That's a big one. So in any kind of, especially with, anti-flat earth grifters, I mean, their entire identity, their full-time, I don't know if they're legitimate humiliation fetishists or if they're full-time trying to fight flat earth, but they realize, at least on a subconscious level, they don't actually understand the scientific method. And that's why you see the way they cope. Again, I'm not claiming any shape of the earth at all. I'm just observing how people interact and have these so-called arguments. John McClure says Alex Jones gets vindicated, not a peep. Yeah. Well, I'm still waiting for people to post the actual clip where he denied deaths at that incident in Connecticut. Because something being staged, it was an if it was orchestrated and staged by the government, that doesn't mean that it didn't actually kill people. I mean, again, going back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, I mean, we're talking about the average coincidence theorist isn't even on a basic literacy level. They don't have basic literacy. Because if you can't even understand basic words, why are you even engaging in any of these arguments? It's weird. And a lot of that is ego and narcissism. I've brought this example up. It's like people of, some of these anti-flat earth grifters have challenged me to debate. It's like a little 4-year-old crying and demanding that a full-grown adult get in the kickboxing ring and go full contact with them, and then pretending the adult is scared when the adult declines. Craig of Fight the Flat Earth famously did that. Plenty of other goofs as well. Like, why would somebody that's on a basic level, again, I'm not claiming I'm that advanced at anything, but if I'm on a basic level and they're not even close, like, what would be the point of a full-grown adult going full contact with a 4-year-old in a kickboxing ring just because the 4-year-old thinks they could win and demands it? So, again, also related to the Dunning-Kruger effect, because these goofs think that they are far more confident than they are, but you cannot fool the subconscious mind, and that's where I think Dunning and Kruger were a bit lacking in examining the connections to narcissism when this is all pointed out, and the need for, a more thorough psychological examination. But let's continue with the basics. Big Pine says it would teach that 4-year-old a lesson they wouldn't forget. Well, that depends. It depends on how deficient the 4-year-old is, because even if you knock the 4-year-old out, they might claim they won. They might claim they taught your fist a really hard lesson, and that your fist is hurting, and they did a really great job, and they would declare victory. I mean, I have a feeling that's what Craig of Fight the Flat Earth, doesn't he declare victory after every debate that he gets eviscerated on? So it depends how deficient the 4-year-old is. If the 4-year-old is at a certain basic mental level, perhaps they would understand that they got defeated. But I posit, if the 4-year-old is on that level to be able to understand that, perhaps they wouldn't be begging for it in the first place. Again, I'm not sure, obviously, like where the understand. I mean, I'm sure there might be some kind of narrow margin on there'd be some kind of narrow margin on the spectrum of understanding where maybe there's some kid that would understand if they got beat, but I would posit the majority of or at least anti-flat earth grifters like Craig, they might not have the mental capacity to even understand they got knocked out, and they would just declare a victory. So, yes, you have to consider that as well. So, continuing on the Dunning-Kruger effect here, the statistical explanation holds that the empirical effect may largely be the result of a mere statistical effect, and the fact that people have a general tendency to think that one is better than average. The rational explanation holds that overly positive prior beliefs about one's skills are the source of false self-assessment. Also, keep in mind, so this is 1999, so this is kind of in the middle of trophy generation. Trophy generation has already started. So another thing that was kind of lacking, like if you take, for example, let's say Chinese people, particularly Chinese martial artists, in the past, they were very humble. So they'd be extraordinary. I mean, there was this Taekwondo guy that I trained with. I mean, this is a Korean guy, but whatever, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, they're all pretty humble, I would say, at least in the past. I mean, this guy was extraordinary. He never once said he would beat anybody up, and he would always downplay his abilities. So even if he completely wrecked somebody and the person said, "Oh yeah, you really got me," and he's like, "Yeah, I did all right. You did pretty good though." So look at the difference between that culture and, these tatted up UFC fighters who think they could beat everybody. I mean, another good example of this is the one and only Ronda Rousey, which I think people were too hard on her. Because Ronda Rousey, I mean, she's probably mentally disabled. I mean, it's weird though. Like, here's Ronda Rousey getting eviscerated by a high school kid. So this is an Olympian getting completely ragdolled. We've gone over Ronda Rousey before. Just effortlessly ragdolled, like effortless, by some random high school kid. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he was even listed as any kind of state champion or anything. I mean, it's just weird. I mean, just complete domination and control. I mean, she's like a redheaded stepchild here. I mean, this is just absolute domination. And yet, she can go through all of that and still claim that she would beat up Floyd Mayweather. She still claims like she'll beat up Steven Seagal, laughably. The great one. I mean, just the goofery. I mean, her boxing looks like this, and she thinks she'll get anywhere near Floyd. The issue is when you have mentally disabled people like Ronda Rousey getting gaslit by everybody around them, telling them they're the best of all time, the greatest of all time. Fighting like part-time soccer moms. Then, of course, she faces a full-time fighter like Holly Holm. Everybody knows what happens, or Nunes. But, she's beating up on soccer moms who are training part-time and thinks she's the greatest of all time. This is a great example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now, some people would say, but she really is proficient at judo. I mean, yes, but she's not. It's not like she's the best at judo. Would she get third place or something, third or fourth place at the Olympics? That's not bad. But, again, this is the female Olympics. Female judo is not exactly the most popular sport in the world. Like, what's the talent depth there? I mean, it's not zero. I mean, but the problem is, even Joe Rogan got on the train gaslighting and saying that Ronda Rousey is like a once-ever athlete, etc. I mean, there's kids off the street who can punch. This is a full-time UFC fighter, former Olympian, and this is what her punches look like. There's kids off the street with no training that could punch better than this. John McClure says, I blame Sheena, Princess Warrior, or Xena. Yeah, everybody thinks they're Xena. The gaslighting. Oh, yes. I mean, you could even do an overlap with feminism here and indulging the ego and narcissism in overestimating female abilities. Like, someone just made a post recently on Twitter on how the Chinese all-female SWAT team beat the American all-male SWAT team because one of the American SWAT team guys, he was some short guy that, like, didn't have good coordination or whatever. But they didn't compare the all-male SWAT, the Chinese all-male SWAT team to the Chinese all-female SWAT team. And the American all male versus the American all female. Like, that would be an actual accurate comparison. But I postulate that this is mostly due to trophy generation. So when you look at these American UFC fighters talking trash, just talking absolute trash, and how many of them truly learn their lesson, though? They usually just make up excuses afterwards and then continue saying they're the best of all time and they just had a bad night, right? I mean, this is the connection to the ego that I don't think Dunning and Kruger went far enough. I just don't think they went far enough. And now with DEI, you have, the past 20 years or so, they actually, with the test scores of Asians versus African Americans or whatever, they're changing all the metrics. So then you have people who actually get into in these supposedly, these indoctrination facilities that are supposedly prestigious that actually don't know anything. Sheena was kind of awesome. I prefer Sheena over Xena. Actually, you can go back to Clan of the Cave Bear too. That was pretty awesome. Look, there's nothing wrong with outliers. It's just like a lot of goofs. Like when you have a generation of narcissists, they all think they're the outlier, and that again connected to the Dunning-Kruger effect. They all overestimate their ability. But part of the reason is society has gaslit them. And Dunning and Kruger did not get into that. And I think that's just such a critical point. Because how do you ignore the gaslighting of an entire generation? I mean, that is just so critical. That is absolutely critical. And again, so what I was talking about with the UFC fighters, I think that's a great example because it's not that they don't have any kind of competency. It's just they're just not humble. And you look at the attitude that some of these Asian fighters have, they're a lot more humble. Well, even in academia too, some of the Asian students were never the ones bragging about how they're the smartest. So a study just came out here that Generation Z has become the first generation to be less intelligent than the preceding generation. Like, this is what happens when you have, this is the end result of participation trophy generation. And Dunning and Kruger, again, did not go into that. And it is just so critical on examining all of this. And trophy generation, like indulging the ego through childhood, just celebrating everything, even when it's not good. Like, they're so afraid to hurt the feelings of their children. This is the result. This is the result. The feels over reals. Like, can this all be boiled down to feels over reals has caused all of this? It has basically caused the collapse of the West. Angle of Elevation says, one problem with DK is that it has become a low-info rhetorical internet insult that only serves to further misunderstanding while the actual study and meaning is hidden behind paywalls and books. Yeah, to a certain extent, but I think it's effective. I think it is still effective as an insult. It's just, like many, it's oversimplified and it falls into the hasty generalization logical fallacy as well, but not necessarily completely inaccurate, which is why I'm doing this one. And how everything is connected. Another explanation claims that self-assessment is more difficult and error-prone for low performers because many of them have very similar skills. Yeah, I mean, these are all valid points, but a lot of these differences are cultural too. Again, look at Asian cultures. They generally much more hardworking than the so-called lazy Americans. You can see that in many fields, academia, martial arts, sports, whatever. And then here's another thing that people just don't understand. America has hundreds of millions of people, so the talent pool is so deep America can be the best at different fields in sports. In sports, this is very evident. You have, let's say, Simone Biles, someone who definitely struggles from the Dunning-Kruger effect. She thinks she's the GOAT, like she was declaring herself. I did 2 whole podcasts on this. The goof Simone Biles thinks she's the GOAT back when she had less than half of the Olympic medals of true GOATs, like Latinina and Kozlowska. And now I think she's tied for second or third or something. And she's never swept an Olympic, like she's never got on the podium on every event on the Olympics. But she thinks she's the GOAT. And this is, so people think Americans are good at stuff or not lazy because there's a 0.0001% of genetic freaks that are just that good. Because Simone Biles, obviously she's mentally weak. I mean, she quit on herself and her team at the Olympics over an issue that pretty much all gymnasts have with, like, twisting. And so getting lost in the air, you know, a mentally strong gymnast just fights through that. She couldn't. She's very mentally weak. But her genetics are so incredible for the sport. Just like in many sports, Americans can dominate at certain sports because the genetic factor is so extraordinary that gives them such a leg up. And the training is good, too. It's almost like in spite of their Dunning-Kruger. They succeed in spite of their Dunning-Kruger and narcissism. Also, what was her name? Sha'Carri Richardson. Definitely an egomaniac weirdo, but not only a genetic freak, but if you look at her training videos when she was younger, I mean, I don't even know if she's the best, but she's pretty good. But the genetic factor plus the incredible training she went through when she was younger, but very competent coaches, and then now because of all of the narcissism and gaslighting, her attitude, she's not going to get as far as she could have gotten. Same thing with Simone Biles. Simone Biles has the genetics to sweep the Olympics. She's got the genetics. It's just when, you know, the narcissism and the ego gets in the way and the Dunning-Kruger effect at play. It's not that they're not extremely good. It's just they think they were way better than they are. And they ignore all evidence to the contrary. Like, for example, Simone not even qualifying for certain event finals. She just ignores that and continues wearing a goat Leo. I mean, hilarious. So, definition, the Dunning-Kruger effect is the tendency of people with low ability in a certain area to give overly positive assessments of this ability. This is often seen as a cognitive bias. That is a systemic tendency to engage in erroneous forms of thinking and judging. And that's where knowledge of logical fallacies comes into play. Because, again, I consider Dunning-Kruger incomplete and limited. For example, even when the knowledge and competency goes way up, I would argue the confidence is still way too high. So it's very incomplete. Again, same thing with Simone Biles. Simone Biles is very good, but she's nowhere near as good as she thinks she is. Otherwise, she would have already swept all the. She didn't even sweep a single Olympics. And by the way, those older gymnasts that did, they never declared themselves the greatest of all time. That's the difference. Like, for example, Kohei Uchimura, considered by many the greatest gymnast of all time, he doesn't consider himself the greatest of all time. And he's much better at his sport than Simone is at her sport. He's actually really high level at all the events, but he's never swept either. But Sherbo has come close to sweeping. I think he went five of... What did Sherbo... I went over this in that episode. He swept almost every event gold. And I don't remember watching the interviews. I don't think he was calling himself the greatest of all time either. And see, that's the difference. The people that actually are the best are not calling themselves the best. So, I mean, in one way, it does align with the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it's simply incomplete. Dr. LA02 says Asians are just as lazy as other races. Are you sure about that? In martial arts? I mean, go to a McDojo. Well, I mean, it's culture. I mean, it's kind of cultural. I mean, if you import the race into American culture, maybe after a few generations. Angle of Elevation says, by problem, I mean that when people tend to use it as a simple reference to knowledge and it really more about confidence. I think people generally do use it in terms of confidence. Like, look at all the goofs claiming things or making claims that are true online. That's Dunning-Kruger effect. They read a couple little things about that. Like, they started at, what is that? They learned a little bit and now declare truth. That kind of aligns with it. Dr. LAO2 says, yes, I'm positive, Bruce. I'm Asian. Well, I'm talking about, like, it's not just, when I say laziness, that's not necessarily aligning with the being the best. But look at the training of an Asian martial arts school versus an American McDojo. I mean, it's more cultural than race-based, but... Dr. LAO2 says, the best are usually always very modest. Yes, and Asians are usually modest and humble. Aaron says, Soy Lodge, excellent example, Aaron. Yes, Soy Lodge is an excellent example as well. Well, and also I reference building a house of cards because when their knowledge goes up, their knowledge isn't really going up. So especially in quackademia. So they're studying all these things that aren't true, but they think that they're true. And then, so again, something that the Dunning-Kruger effect did not account for. Yes, Angle of Elevation says the I Know It All is called many students. When you first graduate university, you can tell when anyone interviews students on campus, they are sure they know it all. And it didn't always used to be that way, by the way. Back in the day, people, even average students were a lot more humble. I mean, I'm not talking about the activists. Those are, lefty loons. But just the average student was a lot more humble. But you are completely correct about that now, which is, again, this new study showing the new generation is less intelligent than the previous for the first time in history. So, yeah. In the case of Dunning-Kruger effect, the systemic error concerns people with low skill in a specific area trying to evaluate the competence within this area and their tendency to greatly overestimate their competence. The other thing that Dunning-Kruger was lacking in is, for example, like, let's say the highest people in their field that are supposedly the highest level of knowledge, but if their knowledge actually isn't true, so they're assessing their own knowledge, like, for example, like you take a brain surgeon and let's say a theoretical physicist that are top in their field. Now the brain surgeon might actually have the experience to back up what he's saying, whereas the astrophysicist, even if he's in the highest level in his field, it's all theoretical, it's all House of Cards, make-believe, dark matter stuff. And yet they're super confident. So even if you're building knowledge that may or may not be legitimate, and the Dunning-Kruger failed to account for that as well, which is huge, which is absolutely a huge factor. So Dunning-Kruger effect is usually defined specifically for the self-assessments of people with a low level of competence. But some theorists do not only restrict it to the bias of people with low skill, but also use it to describe the reverse effect, the tendency of highly skilled people to underestimate their abilities relative to the abilities of others. And I would also argue, again, a limitation of Dunning-Kruger is that highly skilled people also overestimate their abilities. But that's not included here for the most part. In this case, the source of the error may not be in the self-assessment of one's skills, but an overly positive assessment of the skills of others. The phenomenon can be understood as a form of the false consensus effect, the tendency to overestimate the extent to which other people share one's beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And again, one of the reasons I use it primarily, I use the Dunning-Kruger effect, and where I think it's the most effective is in utilizing it in reference to a person's ability to think critically and utilize logic and reason. Because everybody thinks they're logical, right? Even somebody with a low ability or a high ability. Like, even the neurosurgeon who's really good at his job, he might be an absolutely logically fallacious goof. That doesn't mean he's not good at his job. Same thing as like a car mechanic who's an absolute genius on the mechanics of the car, And he might have a good assessment of his ability in relation to that, but not the utilization of logic and reason. And when in quackademia, this is the most evident because you have PhDs are some of the dumbest people out there when you're utilizing logic and reason. That's why understanding logical fallacies is such a great empirically objective metric that you can use. And they all think that because they have these degrees or whatever, that makes them smart, and that means they're logical when they're not. The Fall Enslaves Us All says, when I investigate myself, I find the investigation tips in my favor. I mean, I've always been the complete opposite. I don't know, call me crazy. I'm always looking at, I'm really, and again, I think this is kind of, I don't know if it's just from the martial arts background and the influence of Asian culture, but I mean, I watched a lot of Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee movies. I'm just always looking to get better. So whenever I analyze myself, I kind of skip over what I did well and really focus on what I didn't do well. So that way I can improve. So my my analysis of myself is always highly critical. And so I've always been kind of weird when it comes to that. Dr. LA says, Neil Smoking deGrasse Tyson is a great example of Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Absolutely. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the Dunning-Kruger greats. 1 second here. Let me adjust the stream. Is everything kind of moving smoothly for everybody? All right, so yeah, I don't want to go super long on this one. I want this to be as short and concise as possible so people can reference this. I'm just gonna finish going over the wiki entry here. So, some researchers include a metacognitive. Oh, did I go over this? Yes. They lack the some researchers include a metacognitive component in their definition. In this view, the Dunning-Kruger effect is the thesis that those who are incompetent in a given area tend to be ignorant of their incompetence. For example, logical comprehension, utilization of the scientific method. So even alleged scientists, scientists that believe in evolution or whatever, they actually are ignorant of the scientific method. They did not apply it to that belief, and then they get really triggered when somebody brings it up. They lack the metacognitive ability to become aware of their incompetence. Again, that's the main conscious mind, not the subconscious, because the subconscious is aware when you point it out, and that's why they get triggered. An incompetence often includes being unable to tell the difference between competence and incompetence. It is difficult for the incompetent to recognize their incompetence. This is sometimes termed the dual burden account, since low performers are affected by two burdens. They lack a skill and they are unaware of this deficiency. Other definitions focus on the tendency to overestimate one's ability and see the relation to metacognition as a possible explanation that is not part of the definition. This contract is relevant since the metacognitive explanation is controversial. Many criticisms of the Dunning-Kruger effect target this explanation, but accept the empirical findings that low performers tend to overestimate their skills. Among lay people, the Dunning-Kruger effect is often misunderstood as the claim that people with low intelligence are more confident in their knowledge and skills than people with high intelligence. According to psychologist Robert D. McIntosh and his colleagues, it is sometimes understood in popular culture the claim that stupid people are too stupid to know they are stupid. But the Dunning-Kruger effect applies not to intelligence in general, but to skills in specific tasks. Nor does it claim that people lacking a given skill are as confident as high performers. Rather, low performers overestimate themselves, but their confidence level is still below that of high performers. So yes, there's a lot of variables here, and let's not fall for false dichotomies. Stupid people usually are too stupid to know they are stupid, so that is also true and valid and can also fall within the bell curve here, although it is not exclusive to it. So there you go. That is the super quick overview I'm going to go over one more point here, and which is very interesting here, which is the statistical and better than average effect. If YouTube will allow me to do that, why is it being so slow? Okay, give me a second here. Okay, should be able to get on this screen now. Man, shouldn't YouTube be getting faster instead of slower? All that money, all that Google money. All right. So, okay. Okay. So this is the better than average effect. A different interpretation is further removed from the psychological level, sees the dunning-kruger effect as mainly a statistical artifact. It is based on the idea that the statistical effect known as regression towards the mean explains the empirical findings. This effect happens when two variables are not perfectly correlated. If one picks a sample that has an extreme value for one variable, it tends to show a less extreme value for the other variable. For the dunning-kruger effect, the two variables are actual performance and self-assessed performance. If a person with low actual performance is selected, their self-assessed performance tends to be higher. Most researchers acknowledge that regression toward the mean is a relevant statistical effect that must be taken into account when interpreting the empirical findings. And again, this could also be viewed as part of a control, because if this always happens, then you obviously would get that effect here too, but that doesn't mean it's exclusive. Again, that would be a false dichotomy and reductive logical fallacy to claim that this is all it is. This can be achieved various methods. Some theorists like Giles Gignac and Marcin Zajankowski go further, argue that regression towards the mean is a combination with other cognitive biases like the better than average effect can explain most of the empirical findings. In social psychology, illusory superiority is a cognitive bias wherein people overestimate their own qualities and abilities compared to others. Illusory superiority is one of the many positive illusions relating to the self that are evident in the study of intelligence. So I guess one could actually say illusory superiority would be more accurate when people invoke the Dunning-Kruger effect. They're invoking the illusory superiority, which is again connected to trophy generation, mental weakness, narcissism. All of this is connected. That's my main criticism of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that it's just very limited. Read Deeply says, stupid people can't exceed their own stupidity. They can't get beyond the parameter because stupid. And you know what's very ironic is people who think that they're stupid because they realize all that they don't know are actually really smart because they realize they actually are competent enough to see their incompetence, lack of knowledge and ability, which actually gives them the leg up on people. Dave Begotka in the house saying, every time you say believe, it's like saying you do not know. Yes. You choose the beliefs. So this explanation is called the noise plus bias. According to the better than average effect, people generally tend to rate their abilities, attributes, and personality traits as better than average. They should actually do a comparison of this for like men versus women rating their own looks, because almost every woman out there is going to rate herself a 10, whereas that wouldn't necessarily be true of the guys. So that's another gaslighting, feminist narcissism, ego appeal that's going on within society, all probably orchestrated by the Illuminati to destabilize and collapse the West. Going very well, actually, is it not? Okay, let's continue here. That's a little bit Illuminati sidetrack. For example, the average IQ is 100, but people on average think their IQ is 115. The better than average effect differs from the dunning-kruger effect since it does not track how the overly positive outlook relates to skill. The dunning-kruger effect, on the other hand, focuses on how this type of misjudgment happens for poor performers. When the better-than-average effect is paired with regression towards the mean, it shows a similar tendency. This way, it can explain both that unskilled people greatly overestimate their competence and that the reverse effect for highly skilled people is much less pronounced. This can be shown using simulated experiments that have almost the same correlation between objective and self-assessed ability as actual experiments. Some critics of this model have argued that it can explain the Dunning-Kruger effect only when assessing one's ability relative to one's peer group, but it may not be able to explain self-assessment relative to an objective standard. A further objection claims that seeing the Dunning-Kruger effect as a regression towards the mean is only a form of relabeling the problem and does not explain the mechanism which causes the regression. Based on statistical considerations, Neufer arrive at the conclusion that there is no strong tendency to overly positive self-assessment and that the labeled unskilled and unaware of it applies only to few people. Well, you can demonstrate that to be false, right? Just go around and interview people. Science communicator Jonathan Jarry makes the case that this effect is the only one shown in the original and subsequent papers. Dunning has defended his findings, writing that purely statistical explanations often fail to consider key scholarly findings, while adding that self-misjudgments are real regardless of their underlying cause. Another way to quickly assess this is look at the amount of people that never get beyond where they are, because if they think they already know what they need to know, they're not going to move forward. Now, obviously, nepotism and cronyism aside, obviously, the corporate ladders are all corrupt. But if you look outside regular corporate ladders, like in engineering or whatever, a lot of people on the lower level that think that they're better than they are, they'll never actually get to the higher level because they think they're already there. So because they think they have nothing more to learn or they're good enough, they actually don't get good enough. And you can see this in a lot of fields too. So that's, again, another way to prove that the Dunning-Kruger effect is technically valid. In 2000, Kruger and Dunning were awarded the satirical Nobel Prize in recognition of the scientific work recorded in their modest report. Okay. So that's the gist of it. There's several different psychological factors here. I think narcissism and mental weakness is one of the biggest driving forces in all of this that's all interconnected, which is further proved again by trophy generation and the indulging of the ego, the feels over reals. Is it really that simple? I think it is. I think it might be, and I have a several 100-page book showing how simple it is. All right, so hope everybody enjoyed another edition of the MindShock podcast. If you want to help support the podcast, help logic and reason return to a world that is quickly going extinct, you could donate to our PayPal. Check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. You could also become a YouTube member. Help support the channel that way. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.